Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Randy Peterson with the Texas Public Policy Foundation recently wrote an op-ed for the Austin American-Statesman on the dangers of cutting police budgets. As a police officer for 21 years, Randy has a unique perspective on how to reform policing by introducing better training and reducing over-criminalization within the criminal justice system. So first of all, Randy, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first, let's take better training. How should training change?
Well, currently, when we train police officers in the police academy, almost universally, we use what's called a block and silo type of instruction. There's been recent research out about this by Force Science Institute that shows that almost all police academies do training this way. And what happens is, particularly in physical skills, we teach a block of instruction. Let's say we give them 40 hours, right? 8-hour days, five days, 1 week of defensive tactics training. That's what we would call our physical skills training. And they learn a whole bunch of different techniques, and then we move on to a different topic. Well, that kind of instruction works just fine in an academic setting, right? If we're teaching penal code or traffic code or something like that. When we're actually teaching physical skills, these physical skills are very, very perishable. And by the end of the training academy, the research shows that a lot of recruits don't retain almost any of what they learned during their defensive tactics training. And I liken it to, I was a wrestler in high school, and I said, our coach didn't bring us in, the first week of September, give us a week of practice, and then say, we'll see you in November at the first meet. That it didn't work that way. We did much shorter, intense, but frequent exposures to the training, right? We trained every day for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. If we did that in the police academy, right, where we did shorter instruction, longer exposures, made it more real, and integrated it with all of de-escalation, communications, and all of that, we would see a whole different product.
So then ideally, and obviously every situation is different in when engaging a suspect or whatever, but overall, how would that change the system?
Well, it would change the system without requiring any new Supreme Court decision, right? Right now, the landmark case that governs police use of force is Graham versus Connor, and it establishes the floor, right? A reasonableness standard. What is reasonable? And they look at it as an objectively reasonable standard because it's meant to be evaluated in the eyes of a similar officer with similar training in similar circumstances. Well, if your officer is ill-equipped, untrained, has no confidence, and is unskilled, then their decision to escalate force all the way up to shooting in some situations might very well be reasonable, right? As opposed to a skilled, confident officer who doesn't have that sense of fear in a lesser situation. They're going to have an expanded use of force decision range where they can evaluate a situation more objectively because they're confident in their abilities to deal with that situation. They're going to make a more appropriate and a better use of force decision in almost all circumstances.
So then you say reduce over-criminalization. What do you mean by that?
When we talk about over-criminalization, we talk about the criminalization of all kinds of things, most of which have little or nothing to do with public safety, right? The Eric Garner case in New York is a classic example of that, right? Mm-hmm. Here we had a man who was being arrested for selling loose cigarettes. I mean, to those of us outside of a major city, we might not even understand why that would be an issue, right? But the city wants its money, and they've now they want the tax money from the sale of these cigarettes, and so they send out who else but the police to enforce that, right? We've made them revenue generators and or tax collectors or tax enforcers at some point in doing that. Now, no legislator signed that law thinking that someone would at any point die over the enforcement of that, right? That's not they don't consider that. But when you look at it from a police perspective, the reason that someone is being arrested becomes a very secondary consideration once they start resisting that arrest. Right now, we're at a whole different level, and the police do not have to stop trying to arrest somebody because of perceived or anticipated or actual resistance. They are going to make the arrest and escalate it to wherever the suspect escalates it to. So there is the very good possibility that in any sort of criminalized statute being enforced, that it could escalate to the level of deadly force. And I don't think that a lot of legislators consider that when they make some of these laws.
Mm. So take me into a situation like that. Eric Garner's a good example. I think George Floyd might be another example. Take me into a situation where you have several officers. It's not like it's one person against the suspect, but you have several officers either working together or someone is sort of taking the lead. But take me into that situation where it is escalating to the point where I don't know if I'd say it's out of control, but quickly, things are sort of getting out of control. But what would be the proper response in a situation like that to not get to the point where the person's life could potentially be in danger?
Yeah, both of those examples are hard to use on that one, because the application of deadly force in both of them, if it was there, and we don't know that for sure, particularly in the George Floyd one, the application of deadly force doesn't appear to have been meant to be deadly force, right? I mean, it's obviously intentional if the police officer shoots somebody, but all of these other ones have, both of those subjects had underlying health considerations that may have contributed to the fact that they died, that it may not have been completely the police action. But the overcriminalization is what brought us to the Eric Garner situation, right? So that he shouldn't have been in a position where he was fighting with the police officers. We can argue all day whether or not he should have fought with police officers at all, but there shouldn't have been a reason for them to have contacted him that way if we hadn't overcriminalized a lot of these lower level crimes. George Floyd was already wanted for a higher level crime, from my understanding, I think a forgery for counterfeit bills. So that's a little bit different. But in both of those situations, the resulting resisting arrest, which can happen in any sort of an arrest or enforcement of any statute, resulted in the death of the person, possibly or partly because of underlying health issues. In order to avoid now the situation with George Floyd, I think the lack of checking on the suspect's well-being is an issue there, right? We'll wait to see what happens, what a court decides on how culpable the officer was in his death. But I think in any circumstance, the lack of empathy shown there was what we all can see very clearly.
What can we as a society realistically do about dealing with these sorts of situations? Because clearly there is, whether it's Black Lives Matter or it's, other organizations, Antifa even, there clearly is an anti-police agenda that's being pushed. And so these videos are circulated, they may be edited, the part where the 2 minutes at the beginning where, there's confrontation and all of that sort of thing is cut off. And so the narrative can be pushed. And so what it basically does is it sets the society, whether it's the media or it's the activists or it's just the casual observer, off on this mindset that the police are at fault. Where in a lot of situations, you take Jacob Blake, for example, he clearly was resisting arrest and was attempting to get away. There's speculation about what was in the vehicle, depending on who you listen to. But clearly the officers, at least it seemed like they believed they were in danger, and therefore, the rest happened. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Randy Peterson with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much.